right. We're broadcasting already?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Good. One thing we forgot to do is to rename ourselves, guys. Let's do that.
Ah, yes.
You have a special shout out.
Hello from planet Earth. Hi, Sally.
So rename is awfully close to remove.
Don't do that.
Maybe not the best thing to click on.
Is that like end is close to end for all?
Yeah.
Pittsburgh. All right.
Should we start or let's wait a few minutes? Yeah, let's wait.
Yeah, it seems people are still coming in, so just give them a chance. When it slows down, we can get started. As I said that, it stopped. But... Oh, I mean, yeah, it stopped, so let's go for it, I say. Do we start?
Yeah,
Cool.
let's start. So hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar, a BDD Experience with Ken Pugh. Ken Pugh is a well-known author, speaker, and one of the leading BDD coaches, and today he will train SpecFlow team on how effectively practice BDD. My name is Katerina Gantyshuk. I'm social media content and community manager SpecFlow, and today I'm going to moderate this session. So it's a role-play style webinar. The idea is that each member of SpecFlow team will represent a role, a developer, a tester, and a product owner. And Ken will coach them on how to effectively use BDD in practice. Ali, our product owner, SpecFlow, will play a role of a product owner. Matthias Rapp, our general manager, will play a role of a tester. And Jordan Weston, user journey and support engineer, will be a developer. They will run through a series of exercises focused on context, flows, and discovery. For these exercises, we will use such tools as Mural, SpecFlow Gherkin Editor, and Visual Studio. If you have any questions during the webinar, please use our Q&A tool for questions. Upvote questions that are interesting for you. All questions will be answered as a dedicated Q&A session at the end. During the webinar, we will run few polls. Please answer the questions. We will really appreciate it. And after the first hour, we will have a 5-minute break. And after the 2 webinars, we will send you a recording of these webinars and a certificate. And let's get started. Can you overtake the screen? Oh, you don't need it.
Nope, you just unshare and I want to just be big.
Yeah,
What I've always dreamed of.
there we go.
Okay. Welcome to a BDD Experience. So what are the objectives and tests for this session and workshop? First, to experience BDD and ATDD. To understand the shades of gherkin, some of the different ways that you can write gherkin in order to show how a scenario would work. And then appreciate how BDD, ATDD benefits the team. So we're going to start with our first poll here. Why are you here? Learn the basics about BDD, ATDD, experience a different approach, experience in a different context, or you're just curious. And we'll just give another 5 seconds here.
Let's wait a few seconds. People still voting. And I'm going to end the poll and share results.
Okay. So learn some basics, experience a different approach, and experience in a different context. Okay, excellent. Thank you. Okay. So now, let me start with an introduction. I'm Ken Pugh. I do ATDD, BDD, TDD, VDD, and you name it, all the process stuff. Got 2/5 of a century of software development experience. I'm the co-author of the Safe Agile Software Engineering Workshop and Certification. And my specialty is immersive team-based training and behavior-driven development, acceptance test-driven development. I've got a few books out, including Lean Agile Acceptance Test-Driven Development, Better Software Through Collaboration. Okay? And I emphasize that BDD, ATDD is all about collaboration between the triad, as we'll see. So, and another book called Pre-Factoring, which is about extreme abstraction, extreme separation, and extreme readability. And as we'll notice with our BDD scenarios, we want them to be extremely separated and extremely readable, and preferably also somewhat abstract so that they're not dependent on a very specific implementation. And I've got another book out on interface-oriented design. So let me start with my overall rule. There are exceptions to every statement except this one. And what do I mean by that? When I say you always ought to do something, I don't mean always, but usually always. And when I say you never ought to do something, I don't mean never, ever, but usually never. So if there's something I say and you go, that isn't going to work here, feel free to raise your hand with the exception, because we learn by the exceptions as well as by the rules. And the second is context is everything. Everything exists in a context, and everything is always true in some context. Take Netflix, 15,000 deployments a day. Oh, something to aspire for. But what's the worst that can happen if a deployment goes wrong? You've got a user, all of a sudden they get an error in their streaming, they reload, go to a different server, bingo, life is good. Do that if you're selling stocks, all of a sudden a stock trade doesn't work right, you've got a disappointed customer and a Security and Exchange Commission that is going to be on your back. So everything is always true in some context, but everybody has a different context. And here's my ADD BDD specific rule. No code goes in till the test goes on. No need to start an implementation until we have a test that's telling us that that implementation is working the way we want. And finally, perspective. Somebody looks at a cube and says, oh, I see there's some red and yellow and some orange here. And somebody else looks at it and says, I don't see that red or orange. I do see some greens and some blues. And you turn to third person and they go, well, there is red and there's a blue, green and everything. And what do you have here? You have three different perspectives on the same underlying reality. And that is what we'll see is the three perspectives of the triad. The triad, the developer, tester, and customer. Customer's perspective is, here's how we want to see the external behavior work. Customer states the requirements. The developer implements those requirements and creates something that does what the customer wants. And the tester's job is to critically analyze both the requirements and the implementation. So we have three perspectives that are all responsible for quality. And this is perspectives, not necessarily roles. So you might have two people that are in a developer role, and one of them takes the developer perspective and the other takes the tester perspective. So now I'm going to ask you, what is your role? We're going to have another poll here. Are you a customer, developer, or the tester?
Poll is running. So let's wait. So no share results.
Okay, so we have a lot of tester medium and we have some customers. Okay. In fact, I understand that there might be some product owners and product managers from the United States here. Somebody suggested that a few might attend. All right. So let's take a look. Where this this introduction shows my perspective on ATD BDD, which varies slightly from some other people's perspective. But some of you asked, and your reason for being here was to understand the basics of ATDD. So we're going to try and cover both parts in here. So the first about hour is going to be, we're going to go through some of the basics, and then we're going to work through with the SpecFlow triad on specific examples of this in their Gherkin editor. So first of all, what are acceptance tests? They're tests from the external view of the system. Okay. Inputs, the user sends an input into the system. Does the output behave like it should? State changes. The user is inputting an order and they click on submit. Did the order get submitted? And external interfaces. You're talking to external servers, service providers. Did you send the right information? And did they send back the right information? So acceptance tests from the external view of the system. And then I give two definitions here. Acceptance criteria, general ideas of whether a story or requirement works. I.e., we have a calculator. When I add two numbers together, the sum must be correct. That's a nice criteria. But then we need acceptance tests, specific tests that either pass or fail. When I add 2 plus 2, I get 4. Everybody says, what else could you get? Well, how about 2, 2? Oh, you meant to add, that's like, is that adding? Maybe 1, 0. What? because we're in base 4 rather than in base 10. And for those who say, nobody would make a mistake like that. Well, a few years back, we had a ship that went to Mars, and it was called the Mars Lander. Unfortunately, when it got to Mars, it crashed on Mars, so it's now known as the Mars Crasher. And in the post-mortem, literally after the death of the lander or crasher, two sides got together, trying to figure out what went on. Well, one half of the software was in Europe, and the other half was in the United States. So you can imagine what happened. The Americans said, what did you use for the acceleration of gravity on Mars? And the Europeans said, well, it's about 3 meters per second per second. And the Americans said, meters? So anyway, that's why we have specific tests. So to make sure that we are all talking on the same language. And those tests are implementation independent. It doesn't matter whether we're talking with in Java, JavaScript, assembly language, whatever. The tests are exactly the same. So let's give an example of BDD ATDD. Who wants a fast car? I understand, Jordan. Jordan, didn't you want a fast car?
Always.
Always.
Always. Yeah.
Okay. So I'll
Can't
tell you
afford
what,
it, though.
Jordan. I'm gonna build you a fast car. It's gonna take me just a couple of years.
Okay.
But hold on. Okay. Here we are, Jordan. I got your fast car for you. It does 0 to 100 kilometers in 18 seconds.
Well, hold on a minute. It's not very fast, is it?
Well, it's faster than my car.
Yeah, maybe, but maybe it'd be nice to be a bit faster than that.
Oh, okay. So could you give me a test here? 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in how many seconds?
2.5.
2.5. Okay. Just going to take a couple more years. Okay, here we are. This has been sped up, if you will, so that we don't waste too much time. There we go. 0 to 100 kilometers in 2.5 seconds. Is that fast enough for you?
Yes.
Great.
It is.
That's good, because 100 kilometers per hour is its top speed.
Oh, well, no, that's not much fun, is it, Ken?
Oh, I can see you're disappointed.
I am.
Yeah. So tell me, what do you want for its top speed?
I mean, let's say at least 180 miles per hour.
180 miles or kilometers? Let's just keep this.
Let's say miles.
Let's say miles. Okay, 180 miles per hour. Just going to take me a couple of more years. Okay, there we go. 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in 2.5 seconds. Top speed 180 miles per hour. Is that fast enough for you?
It's perfect.
Great. Because in order to get that top speed, we had to cut down the weight. And so one of the things we had to do was cut down the size of the gas tank. So you'll be able to do 180 miles per hour for 1.2 seconds.
Well, yeah, I've got a heavy right foot, Ken, so I don't think that's not going to work for me.
That's not going to work. Okay, so we could continue this along here and get all of the details, but I think the points have been made here. So what do we have here? Well, our criteria is that it's got to accelerate to desired speed within some amount of time, but our test is to accelerate 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in 2.5 seconds. Either the car does that or it doesn't do it. That's pretty straightforward. Okay. So now we have a test. And so what does ATD BDD do? Is it starts with a requirement, and through discussion, we come up with a whole series of tests against that requirement. i.e., for our fast car, we have acceleration, we have top speed, we have time at top speed, and everything else. So what have we done? We've taken a requirement and broken it into very specific tests that the implementation must meet. Now, these tests are from the external point of view of the system. We're going to press the accelerator down. That's our input, and our output should be that we get to 100 kilometers per hour in 2.5 seconds, independent of the implementation of the automobile. So let's take an example of how we might implement this. Here we have our components. We have an engine, a transmission, a drive shaft, and a wheels. And now Jordan presses down on the accelerator and we get the movement out. And we can, through design, come up with behavior for each of those individual components that in combination form the external behavior. But there's an alternative design. We have a controller with an engine or motors and wheels, and we get movement out. This is the electric vehicle. Okay. Press down on the accelerator, we get movement out. But now, I'm going to ask a question to Jordan. When you press that accelerator down to get to 2.5 seconds to get to 100 kilometers per hour, do you want it to go, or do you want to go?
Yeah, the second.
The second. Okay. So we have behavior that this design doesn't meet. So what we need to do to add this implementation is a noise generator that will produce the external behavior to meet our customers' requirements. And of course, it can be fancy. You can decide to have a noise generator sound like a BMW or a Porsche or a Miata or whatever you want it to sound like. So now we've met those requirements. And by the way, noise generator is actually a requirement because we have multiple stakeholders for automobiles, and those who are visually impaired like to be able to hear automobiles coming. And so some electric vehicles have noise generators just for that particular purpose, not just for our driver to feel like they're accelerating. So why do we do this? Well, first, little room for miscommunication. It's 2.5 seconds to get to 100 kilometers per hour. It's pretty straightforward. The workflow's working the first time. We've clarified all the details. Getting the business rules right. That's probably the most important thing, because over 50% of the code I estimate in this world is about business rules. You get money out of an ATM. You either get it or don't get it. And there are about 200 business rules as to why you don't get it. We want to get those right. Crisp, visible story completion. When the tests pass, then we are done with the story. And finally, tighter cross-functional team integration, because the product, the customer, the developer, and the tester are sitting in creating all those tests for requirement. And finally, automation yields reduced testing time. I always suggest getting the business rules and the tests correct, and then automating them. Because if they're wrong tests, then all you're automating is the wrong requirements. So what do we have? We've got misunderstanding to understanding. We're going to try a audience participation. We're going to input a temperature in Celsius and output a temperature in Fahrenheit. And I'm going to ask my developer, how many seconds, how many minutes will it take you to write this method, inputting the temperature in Celsius and outputting the temperature in Fahrenheit?
I think with my skill set, Ken, I'm going to say 10 seconds max.
10 seconds max, because there's only a couple of lines in there.
Exactly.
Okay. So what I want you to do is give me some examples. And please put it in chat and we will, let me bring my notepad up here a second. Okay. So if we have Celsius to Fahrenheit, we need some tests to give to Jordan. So 0 degrees Celsius. What should that guy be in Fahrenheit? And just answer in the chat. 32. All right. What other test should we have? Just give me the two sides. We got, okay, 32. Give me another test for Jordan. What Celsius? 100 degrees Celsius, but you have to give us the answer.
212.
212. Okay. How about 1 degree Celsius? And now everybody's running to their Google calculator. Oh, hold a second. Oh, we're getting, come on. Hold on a second, -41. Oh, okay. Oh, man. Okay. We got a -1. We got a minus 37. We got a -273. Okay. Hold on a second. You're only giving me one side. You got to give me the answers. You can't just say do this. Okay. But you don't have your calculator. So we get 33.8 here. And somebody suggested that this was
30.2.
30.2. Okay.
The other one is 98.6, Ken.
98.6. All right.
This would be minus 459.4.
459.4. Now this is interesting. Okay. So if I have something that when I convert it comes out to 33.85. So this is whatever I've converted to. How many decimal digits should I have in the output?
Are you asking us or our audience, Ken?
Well, I'll ask the audience, but if they don't answer, we'll take your
I'm okay with 1 digit.
1 digit. Somebody wants 6 digits. Boy. Okay. So if you say 1 digit, what do you want me to do to this? 33 point what?
9.
33.9. So we call that rounding up, right?
Yes.
So if my result was 33.85, this should be come out to minus 33 point what?
Yeah, it's a good question. So actually, the higher number is 33.8, right?
Yeah.
Because we're in the negatives. Yeah.
So you want that to be 33.8. Oh, we have 33 point, oh, 33, okay. Somebody, yeah, we got 33.9, 33 point, so we got minus 33.8. All right, cool. So we've got our rounding up. Now, somebody mentioned minus 275, which is below absolute zero. Oh, somebody wants 3 digits too. Oh, good. You said, before we get to that one, you said 1 digit. Somebody says 3 digits. Somebody else says 6 digits. Man, we only have one answer. I mean, should we add another thing in this saying how many digits do you want to round it off to? Well, at least I'm glad we've had these examples here and we can say, yep, we need to ask the customer to get the right requirement. You are the customers. You want, it should be configurable. Thank you, Vic. Now we're going to have number of round off digits. Oh, man. Okay, Jordan, your 10 seconds might be starting to increase slightly.
Yeah.
So let's get back to minus 275. That's below absolute 0. Should we throw an error or not throw an error?
I guess it depends in which context this is used, to me at least, Ken. If this is used by something that should not go beyond that, then we should probably error out. If this is just a straight up calculation, we can calculate it.
Okay. So we are context sensitive. Let's say for this context, we'd like to throw an error.
Yep.
All right. So what have we done here? Especially since we have so many customers out there in the audience as well. We'd have a very large session to gather this all together. We need to decide how many decimal digits, whether we round up, round down. Okay. We have a formula, but the formula, of course, doesn't include the how many decimal digits you might have in there. Whether we should throw an error if you are out of range. Oh, let me ask this. If minus 275 throws an error, if we get to 1,000 degrees, is that too hot or should we throw an error? Nah. Oh, good. We have all 3 answers. Throw an error, don't throw an error, or it depends. Yes, and now this is truly context sensitive, which is why we have these discussions so everybody understands the context. Maybe it's an error. Maybe it should be converted to whatever that becomes 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit or whatever the number is, and so forth. And that is context sensitive. If this is it a calculator? Is it we're doing temperatures of the atmosphere? Are we doing, as one person in one of my classes was a nuclear physicist, and he said, 1,000 degrees on the sun? Come on. Yeah. You got to go to millions here. So it is all context dependent. Okay. Take Notepad off of there. All right. Well, I'm glad that Jordan said that he's going to be doing this all in 10 seconds. The Celsius, given 0, when we compute the Fahrenheit, then we get a value. There's our given when then. And now here's a table. Oh, I do not have dynamic PowerPoint slides. So as you'll notice here, we have 2 digits of precision rather than just 1. An error for below Kelvin. And of course, the question is whether we need a maximum or not. Now, we have given, when, then. So now, Jordan, we have a few additional requirements here to round things off, given a number of digits, to throw errors. do you want to revise your 10-second estimate? Okay.
Sorry, I'm on mute, right?
Yeah,
you're
you were
on mute.
mute.
Sorry. I said, yes, I would love to. Let's call it half a day.
Let's call it half a day. And then somebody said, you don't do very good estimating, do you? And then if they talk about that, you go, well, no, it was 10 seconds, but it was really Martian seconds, which are much longer than Earth seconds.
Exactly.
So you'll never be wrong. We can always find a measurement in which your number is correct. So one of the purposes of doing all of this test up front is so the developers can estimate better, can give an example of such as this. We get all of the tests. So now this is a scenario. It's a simple scenario. Given our setup, the value is C, Celsius. When we convert it to Fahrenheit, then we assert the value is F. Fairly simple. Given, when, then. Now, given, when, then, that's our desired behavior. What's our test? We set up the given, we compute the Fahrenheit, and then we simply check that the value is what we stated. So a behavior says this is what we expect. Test says we check to make sure we got what we expected. Well, what does that mean? Expected system state or output is a behavior. When we do something, we expect a certain output. That's the behavior. And so expected behavior drives development, and we get behavior-driven development. But if we talk about tests that the behavior is acceptable, then acceptance tests drive development, and we get acceptance test-driven development. Well, behavior-driven development and acceptance test-driven development are really only slightly different perspectives into exactly the same thing. Given, when, then, given, when, check the then is the difference between BDD and ATDD, but the actual results turn out to be the same. So now, how do we implement these examples in the test? We've sat together as a group, and the triad has sat together, come up with those numbers and those tests. Now developers could take it and do a unit test framework, or we could do a BDD, ATDD framework. Let's take the X unit framework, such as here in Java land. We create a test. We assert that 32 is the value that we get back from convert temperature when we pass it 0 with a precision of 4 decimal digits. And then we have a test for converted boiling, 212, and we convert the temperature at 100. So we have a given 0. When we do the convert, then that's what our answer should be. We could do this. Developers could take those tests, convert them in here. But let me ask this to our product owner, to our customer, Lee. Is this readable? Are you a technical person, or are you a marketing? Are you a business person?
Probably more of a business person.
So does this make? Yeah.
No, not much of a sense. I can read temperature in there. That's it.
Yeah. Okay. So really, this is a test that automates but does not communicate.
Yep.
All right. So let's look at number 2. Lee, can you read this table?
Yeah, this is in English, so can do this.
It's in English. In fact, this is in the language of business.
Yep.
Because what does business speak? Excel. Okay. So this table is in the language of business. Now, wouldn't it be neat if we could just do this table and convert it into an automated test? That if we could simply clap our hands, stomp our feet, and it would turn into a test. That doesn't work because we have to stomp our feet, clap our hands, and then it turns into a test. You'll notice here that we had 5 green and 1 red. The 1 red, well, we expected 0.67, it returns 6.8. Now, we could do this with a turn of the millennium automation tool called Fit and Fitness, but there's our given when then. But instead, we can use our Gherkin and SpecFlow to put it in perhaps even a little more readable terms. There's our scenario outline, convert Celsius to Fahrenheit. Given our Celsius is Celsius, when we convert it to Fahrenheit, then temperature is Fahrenheit. We have exactly the same table as we have before. We have some notes that are saying why things should be that value. And now we have something that automates and communicates. That's what we'd like to have. Because then we don't have to be doing any translation from the business into the technical. Now, this is a scenario outline. It's a common way to do things that you've seen a lot of on the web, perhaps, if you've been doing BDD for a while. But we can even simplify this more. Notice that we have a little template there that basically says, given here are our inputs, we perform an operation, then we get an output. There's our given when then. We can actually write it just like this, that our input is Celsius, our output is Fahrenheit, and those are our values. It turns out this just is a little more efficient, depending on what your system is, to use, and it does away with a few extra words that may or may not add anything. So there we go. We have our automation technique, and in fact, tomorrow Jordan will be showing how you simply convert something that looks like this into the actual automated test. Fairly straightforward. Given, when, then. But the key is creating this test, this scenario, with, is it 2 digits? Is it 1 digit? Do we want to throw an error? Do we not want to throw an error? By creating these tests, we are clarifying the requirements. And now the implementation meets the actual requirements, not the assumed requirements. So what is temperature conversion? Well, it's an example of a business rule or calculation scenario. Business rules and calculations. Some inputs are converted to an output. They're obviously stateless because everything is computed from the input and appears in the output. They're simple to write, and as we'll see, very simple to automate. And as I mentioned before, 50 or 60% of code is probably all about business rules. And by doing nothing else but getting these business rules automated, you'll catch a lot of your defects. So now, requirements and tests. We got 2 different types of testing. We have attempting to find defects is wasteful, but attempting to prevent defects is essential. So what's the difference between this? Well, if we create those tests after the code has been implemented and we're trying to find defects in the implementation, we are going to find some because there was misunderstanding. but attempting to prevent defects is essential. We give all these tests to our developer. I'll pick on Jordan. If you're given all these tests up front, Jordan, and one of them fails while in your developer box, will you simply turn the implementation over to the testers, or will you actually fix the implementation?
Yeah, I'll refactor the implementation until the test pass.
You'll refactor the implementation so the test pass. So if we gave you every test that we could think of, you would simply make the implementation pass those tests. Ugh. That saves a lot of time. Now, that doesn't mean, as we'll see, there's still other testing that needs to be done, exploratory testing, usability, and so forth. But the more tests that we can come across ahead of time, the fewer defects that need to be found afterwards. So when are the defects found? Well, prevention is just early detection. On Jordan's box, the test fails, Jordan just fixes it. That's it. So now, what do we have here? A failing test is a requirement. That is, if a tester comes up and creates a test and that test fails, and the system cannot be shipped without that test passing, then that test is a requirement the system must meet. And next, all the tests that currently pass specify how the system works. If the test passes, this is the behavior of the system. Not with a 100-page requirements document, but the test document is the specification. So it turns out test and requirement are interrelated. You can't have one without the other. If you have a requirement, you should have a test for that requirement in order to show that it meets. And if you have a test, that is a requirement the system must meet. And to help you remember that is just a little ditty.
Tests and requirements, go together like a tulip and mint. How they go together. You can't have one, you can't have none. You can't have one without the other.
Okay. Now the rest of you didn't get on and join in the dance. Okay. So, at 2 o'clock this morning, you'll wake up and going, so how did that go? If you can't remember, just email me and I'll send you a link to a video with it all on it. So what are the steps? Well, a test is 3 parts. You write the test, then you bind it to the system, and then you run the test. Binding is so automated. So who authors the test? Who writes them? Customer, developer, tester, the triad together. And who connects the test to the system? Well, the developer, because they're the ones that are going to write the executable code. And who can execute the test? Anybody. Developers, testers, customers. And of course, we can always put them as part of the build. Now, this binding suggests that this is an automation binding. We can also automate against the internals, or we can automate against the UI, all depending on how your system is set up. But what happens a lot of times? Well, the developer codes, and then the tests are written. It's hard to bind automatically a test that is written after the code. It's doable, but it still takes a little bit of time. Okay, so it's better that we write the test first, then bind them, and finally run the code. Run a test while with code is being written. And this gets us into our in essence, our TDD test red green cycle. All right, so we're going to do 2 polls here now. When do you create your tests now? Before implementation, during, or after, or some combination? And then the next is, who creates them in general? Testers, developers, the triad, or so forth. So you've got 2 poll questions there. We'll give you about 10 seconds to click on when and who.
So I'm sharing results.
Okay. So you got about a half are creating them all before implementation. 15% and 10% are doing it afterwards. About over a third, developers and everybody, the triad, testers and developers, and another third, and the testers alone. Okay. And then scroll down to the other, if you could, scroll down to the bottom part of the poll.
I think you have to do
Oh,
that.
I got to scroll down.
Yeah.
Oh man. Okay, and customers very few. Okay, so we got at least a third of the people. All right. So what we want to do is take those during and afters and move them back into the befores. Now, context, flow, and discovery. We have what I showed with the temperature example is a business rule or calculation scenario. Very simple, some input and some output. And then we have our flow scenarios. We need to set up some state, some preconditions, have an action or event occur, which triggers an operation, which then creates a new state or an output, i.e. postconditions. So given when then, preconditions trigger postconditions. More complicated than a simple business rule scenario, input, call a method, and an output. So we have our given when then, and let's take an example flow here. We're going to use that conversion scenario in a larger scenario where we're going to convert temperatures that are in a report. We're going to have a report and we're going to read it in, and all the temperatures we find will be converted. And we're going to have a temperature setting for this conversion that either says we want to convert everything to Fahrenheit or to Celsius. So here, given a temperature setting is Fahrenheit, we receive a report that has lots of temperatures in Celsius in it, and then it's going to create a report with all those temperatures converted to Fahrenheit. That's a flow. We have to set up this state of a report, perform some operations, and then we get the new state of the report, which has been converted. More complicated than a very simple business rule. Given when. So most of the things that we do in an application are about flow, because you simply just don't have a calculator in most applications. We start with something, we do something, and we end up with something. And so I'd like the SpecFlow people to explain the application, the feature that we're going to talk about, and show some of the stories for which we're going to work to develop some tests for it. I turn it over to you.
So I'm going to share my screen.
Am I muted? No.
No,
Cool. All right, let me share my screen.
I'm sharing. Or do you want to share?
You can share if you want. Yeah, go for it. All right, you know what? Let me do it, Katerina, because I want to show the application on the browser.
Okay.
Yeah. Screen 2. Yeah. Okay, cool. All right. You guys seen the Gherkin editor?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Excellent. So today let me zoom out. As Ken just explained, we're going to be showing you guys the user stories that are involved in developing an application that is a real life application by SpecFlow. It's called the SpecFlow Gherkin editor. I've got it open here. It's an application that is live right now in production. You can access it, but not now. Do it after the webinar. It's very simple. It helps you write Gherkin. It's specially coded to have syntax highlighting and a bunch of features to make writing Gherkin easier for you. So when we were developing this, obviously we had the user stories and everything sorted out. So I'm just gonna demonstrate the stories we had and the 3 different releases that we've had so far and what was involved in each of them. So the first one, the MVP, the minimum viable product that we got to the market and collected feedback on, was obviously it's a web application that requires to sign up with the SpecFlow account. So that was the first one. We wanted everyone to be able to save their feature files. Have an area, once you save your feature file, we wanted you to be able to open and have an overview of all your feature files, so a list of them. And also, most importantly, be able to share the feature file. Now, the sharing is what we're going to do most of the exercises today on, but the application also has different types of sharing. There is read-only sharing. There is a account. You can create an account with the SpecFlow account, or you can do one where you create one with the Microsoft account. You also have the option to open a copy of the feature file you're looking at in a new tab. And these are the most recent updates we made to the application, which were a Gherkin assistant. This is actually pretty cool. It helps you, it checks your Gherkin structure and it gives you suggestions. So if you are, I don't know, you have 3 whens statements, one after each other, that's obviously wrong. So it will just give you a suggestion that, hey, look at it again, this might be wrong. And we also added an autocomplete feature recently. This would help you reuse the existing steps. So as someone who's writing these given them statements, you want to reuse and recycle as much as you can, because it would make the automation a lot faster and easier for the test engineers and the developers. Oh yeah, the roles, we already spoke about them. So yeah, these are the stories we had for the 3 different releases. And I already showed you all the application, an overview of it. Let's go back here. So when you open it for the first time, you have this given when then. This is the template. This calculated example is there. If I want to have a look, this is the first time you log in, you will see this example there, and the assistant is down here. Obviously, this is correct Gherkin, thankfully. It's our own template. So we don't have any errors, but if you did have an error, this 0 number would change to 1 or 2 and give you suggestions based on that. So yeah, user stories. Did you want me to read the stories one by one, Ken?
Why don't you just read about sharing a feature file and account creation with the email?
Sure. So one of the main features, as I said, it was sliced out in the MVP, was to share the feature files, because if you can't share the Gherkin, it's pointless. It would just be an online editor. So in order to collaborate and receive feedback, we allow sharing a feature file. Share a feature file, that's the story. And the account creation. So sharing a file and saving files requires an account. I should say here that the application is free. You don't need to pay for anything. We all just ask for, in order to convert more anonymous users into a registered user, we will enable the account creation with email password instead of Microsoft only. So we wanted to give everyone the option to use use first name and last name and an email address instead of using a Microsoft login process, because there are some restrictions if you're using your work email to do that. So that was our intention. I think the main focus in the exercise today, Ken, will be the share feature file and the account
Correct.
creation. Yeah.
Right, and then you also have, you can share, but you've got read-only sharing if you're not logged on, or you can,
Correct. Sharing is restricted. It's only for registered users. So any type of sharing, but there are 3 different access levels, if you wish to call them that. So there is read-only that you can just, I write a feature file, I share it with Jordan, and I don't want Jordan to touch anything or move anything around, and I just share it with him as a read-only or read-only with permission to edit it as well. So there are 3 different access levels in the sharing file.
okay, thank you.
No problem.
Okay. Let's see here, have we come? We said we're gonna take a 5-minute break, and it looks like we are at the five-minute break point. So why don't we take a 5-minute break, come back and be prepared. Our next thing that we're going to talk about is the context diagram. So see you back in 5 minutes.
I'll stop sharing, yeah?
Mhm.
Yeah.
So we're resuming at 4:36 our time here. All right.
Okay. So now, context. Context, as I mentioned, is everything. But we also have the context diagram. The context diagram shows us what's inside of the system and outside of the system, right? And as we said, our acceptance tests are going to be implementation independent. So they're only going to concentrate on what comes in and out of the system. So our flow that we have a system that sends a report to us. We're going to read a temperature setting off of some configuration file, which is going to be external. And then we're going to send that report to somebody else. Okay. So we've got a system that creates a report and sends it to this application. We have a configuration that we're going to have to maintain, and we have a report coming out. So now our test says, here's our input report, that our output report can be converted properly, all the temperatures. Now, why do I like to bring up a context diagram? Because if you look at it, it shows who are the external actors, be they a database, be they just another system, be they a human being. And if we're going to try and automate our test, we're going to want to create a test double. Okay, developers call it mocks or stubs or other names. Test double is a generic term that basically is a stand-in for the real thing for during testing. And so we'll probably want to test double for if we wanted to test our entire system automatically, we need a test double for the system that sends a report. We may not need a test double for configuration data. We could use the real thing. And we might need a system that receives the report and checks to make sure that it's all proper. So that's the reason for a temperature context. What's external to our application and what's internal? What behavior do we need to test? So given our temperature setting, when we receive the report, then it is sent out with all the temperatures converted. There's our scenario in terms of the context diagram. So now, for our SpecFlow, we've shown the application. Draw a context diagram for this application. Your turn.
Right.
So who's sharing?
Yeah.
So Katarina, can you share and follow one of us?
Yes, I'm doing it.
Good. Okay, so I guess let's start with the centerpiece, right?
Mhm.
So let's make this the working editor. This is the application.
I guess we have
two flows, right? We have two types of users.
so this is external dependencies, isn't it? So for example, I guess for authentication, I guess is an external dependency.
Mm-hmm.
We've got, I guess, a database to store.
And we got
Features, I guess.
And then we need to somewhere store the users, right? So we have some user storage.
Yeah, I guess this is better than authentication.
You got two types of users, right? Unregistered and registered users. No?
Yeah, we do. We do. We do have, that's how you get to the system.
Yeah. I'm trying to map out the journey. So we got unregistered and registered users. That would go like that into the system. Yeah. Why are my arrows so bad?
Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
Downloading a file.
Yeah, that's how you get things out of the system. That's right. And then the registered user can actually.
Author can view, can save, and can share.
Yeah, and also can create sharing links, share files. Mhm.
So the user registry, where we store the user details, would be a two-way flow, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
There we go. Database to store features, yeah.
Guess you've got sharing files as well. I guess you could treat it separate. It's another way of, because it generates a link, right?
Okay, so on a context diagram, you can start to try and put everything into it, which then, of course, there's always this trade-off of, being too abstract versus being less, being more detailed. So, at this point, I'm going to call it, this is probably about the maximum number of things, entities that one might come up with or have. And in fact, if you've got something that has lots of entities, then you really have a complex system.
Mhm.
So at this point, should we have both registered and unregistered users as two separate things here, or should we just have a user that is just interacting, and underneath in different diagrams will show the fact that there are registered and unregistered users?
Well, they have different options. They have different features that they can use. So
Right.
I don't know if that makes them separate here, but there are restrictions for unregistered users.
Exactly. And so it really becomes a matter, do we want to show that detail in this diagram, or the fact that we simply, if we were going to automate everything, I'm going to have just one user test double that tries to do things, and we can put that same test double in as registered or unregistered.
Yeah, we could probably simplify it a bit, but it may make sense to call it out because there's such a distinct difference between those two. It was a pretty fundamental, when we were discussing this back when, it was a pretty significant decision that we are allowing everybody to get right into the system as an unregistered user versus asking for a registration up front, which is what most applications do, right? But we let people in right away. So that's a very signature thing of this of the solution, which may make it worth calling it out, Ken.
Yep. As I say, it's all context
Right.
sensitive. So we've got our Gherkin editor. It's going to be talking to a database that stores away the feature files. The Gherkin editor might produce a downloaded file. It's going to be talking to a user registry that keeps information in your registered users and sharing files with a link. Really,
I think we have the share file here. So
right. So that might not necessarily be an external. That would simply be a registered or unregistered user is going to access a file with a link. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. It looks good.
does it? These arrows are killing me. I gotta move.
I normally, but Mural doesn't have it. I normally would just put in a two-way arrow rather than two separate arrows, but I don't think Mural has a two-way.
As long as we don't start doing this, guys, it's all good. This would be.
Please no.
Okay, so now if we're going to automate this, maybe we don't need a test double for the database because we can just reconstruct it at the beginning of a test. Maybe we don't need a test double for the user registry because once again, we could reconstruct that at the beginning of a test. Or maybe we do have a little user registry storage if it's more complicated that we want to have registered users. And when they come in, they already have some features and already are registered and so forth. So whether we have, especially for databases, whether we create a test double for that database and it represents a true a test double that executes differently than a database, or whether we simply have a test database that is not used for production that we access and we have complete control over, is just once again context sensitive. Whichever way, if it was a external service, you might have a test double for it. All right. So thank you very much. You can.
Should I stop sharing?
Go ahead.
Should I stop sharing?
Yeah, stop sharing. We'll go back. Okay. Okay. So, as I mentioned, why is it context important? Because it's from the external view of the system, and we just need to decide what's external and what's internal. And as I mentioned, that's why we want to have those test doubles potentially for any of the external interactions. And the reason for that is repeatability and speed. You don't necessarily need a test double all the time. You can use a real thing as long as it's repeatable and fast enough. And we want these test doubles regardless of whether the tests are manual or automated, because we'd like to be able to run a manual test and know that that user is already registered on the system. So now let's do the flow. Most every application has a flow to it. Start somewhere, we work through it, and we end up somewhere. We might go back and repeat and loop things, but they have a flow. We don't just willy-nilly do things. So here is our flow for the temperature flow. Receive and convert a report. So in order to do this, our first step in the flow is to actually configure whether we want the output in Celsius or Fahrenheit. And then we receive the report, we convert it, and then we output the report. It's our basic flow. So now we have steps in a flow. Given, when, then is our large portion of a flow. But then we can have each of these steps has its own little flow. i.e., when we're converting the report, first we have to parse the report to find all the temperatures within it. Then each of those temperatures we convert, and each of the temperatures we put and replace in the output report. All Celsius converted to Fahrenheit. Now, maybe you might have a slightly different flow through here, but something similar. So what we have here is an overall flow, and we're going to want to run one scenario against the entire overall flow to make sure all our plumbing is correct, i.e. that receiving report passes it correctly, convert, and so forth. But we don't want to run all the detailed scenarios through that one large report. The reason, or the one large scenario, because the reason for this large scenario is to say, okay, here's an example flow. Let's make sure all the pieces are together. And now, as we get more detail, we're going to have more tests against more detailed parts of the flow. Yep, we'll parse the report. We'll try a report with 1, 2, 5 or something. And we'll replace it. And that convert temperature. That's where we went into all of that detail in that business rule. And we could come up with even more and more detail. So we've got lots of scenarios and examples at the very base, which we don't show down here underneath convert temperature. We have fewer in here. And of course, up here, we'll only try one. Now, if it's really critical and you've got a critical system, yeah, you'll try more up here. But we should at least try one to make sure that the plumbing between all of these steps. And once again, this looks linear, but it could be we receive the report, convert it, output it, and then we start back again with receiving, convert, and outputting. But then maybe sometime we go back and change the configuration. So forth. So we tend to show things linearly on. If you want, you can show a couple of loops in there. So that's our flow. There's one thing I want to talk about this flow. You'll notice that we have this flow given, when, then. And once we receive the report, we have a report. The then part of receiving report becomes the given part for converting it. And the output of our convert, which is the report that everything's been replaced, the then part of the convert becomes the given of our outputting report. So this flow shows that the then becomes a given, and that scenario then becomes the given of another output. And this puts all our scenarios into a context, the flow context. So they aren't just scattered little scenarios. They're all part of a big flow. Given, when, then. And we have even smaller given, when, thens. So it's almost like a hierarchy of things. All right. Can create a flow diagram for your feature, i.e., show just one flow, maybe two if you want, and we're going to take that story and show where in the flow, and it could be 2 steps, that story or that feature fits in. All right. SpecFlow, your turn.
Yes, coach.
Okay. So I guess the first one is go to the editor, right?
Yeah, but I think we should distinguish who goes to the editor, because as Matthias said in the diagram, that registered and unregistered user going to the editor will have a different flow.
Yeah. First thing they would do is change the template file, right?
Yeah,
That is being.
that would be common both between them. Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm. So that's pretty much all you can do.
It's the share. Is it the sharing feature that we're looking
Yeah,
at?
we didn't
right,
write the
okay.
sharing, so I think we should write here probably. User wants to
Done. I mean, one save. Do they need to save it first? I'm not a very good developer, am I? I don't even remember what I hypothetically developed.
There are 100 other people here, so don't make us say anything. Okay.
So, and this is pretty much all you can do. I mean, you could literally only modify the template file, and then the other thing you could do is to open up a shared file if you got
Yeah,
the
view a shared file, yeah.
right, but we're not in that scenario. So that means the next
Yeah.
step would be to log in or create an account, right?
Yeah, because we want to share a feature file. Yeah, the flow is for sharing.
Oh, okay. So
log-
they need to. So unregistered is irrelevant then. And oh no, so they unregistered. They need to register or log in, right? So this is a flow, right?
That's a good point. So basically, that doesn't matter, but it matters if whether you are coming back or you are coming to us. So because if you have been registered earlier, then you would still be logged in, right? So that makes a difference.
Right. So maybe we could change the whole thing at the top and say unregistered user wants to share a feature file, and then just write the flow for
Right,
the
exactly. That would be the
unregistered.
flow. That would be the flow. Yeah.
So if I write unregistered,
Okay, so the first step would then be to register, right?
correct. Yep.
If yes.
If they're unregistered, they need to register, right?
Mhm.
Well, maybe the first step is they change the template and then they register, because it wouldn't stop them.
We probably should settle on what the happy path is. So the happy path is that you
Yeah.
come to us, and then you probably want to, for the first time ever, which means you see the template and you would change the template, and then if you would like to save your change, you would then start to create an account or register, and then
Right.
you can actually truly save it.
And actually, would it be better to say unauthenticated user wants to share a feature file instead of unregistered?
Mm-hmm.
Because ultimately, it just matters whether they're authenticated or not, right?
Yeah, I agree.
Whether they're unregistered or registered or logged in, it's neither here nor there. It's whether they're authenticated.
Yeah, they're not authenticated because they could already be authenticated, which would be another scenario. And
Well,
it's
they may already be registered, just not authenticated, right?
correct.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Okay. So that means so the scenario is unauthenticated user wants to share a feature file. Okay, so that's the flow. So change
Should the flow say, so should it be another step here that says between these two? So they come in, they change the template, and then they attempt to save it or share it, and then they realize they have to log in or create an account.
Well, or you may realize it immediately.
Let's keep it generic. Let's
Yeah,
just think
yeah.
of it. Yeah.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Not too much detail.
Let's assume we made it intuitive enough by graying out the button that
Yeah.
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 that you are clicking on the right things.
So once they've logged in, they can share it, right? So they can just generate the link.
They have to save it and then they can share it.
Mhm.
Register? No.
And then share, yeah.
But it would be log in, save, share, and then once they want to share, they can pick the access level after that. So isn't that another step?
What was that, Ali?
I'm just saying after save, they need to share the file, right? And when they are sharing, they can change the sharing status of the file. So does it need another step here?
Well,
After
it's
save.
yeah. It's basically you're flipping the accessibility of the file, right? So that's what we are really doing. I mean,
Mhm.
I don't think we need to distinguish
Yeah.
how we represented it on the UI. Do you think that we need to?
I think not. And I also think we don't need to be this specific, right?
Right.
Yeah,
I
I think
think
I'm
you could
going
just
into too
say-
much details. Yeah.
You can just say, instead of change the template, you can just say edit, log in, save, share, right? It depends. I don't know. Ken, what do you think?
Well, I in fact, I like less detail and you get more into the detail as you go into the story. So I, in fact, could change login, create account to just authenticate.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And then you're going to have a separate flow for authentication.
Mm-hmm.
So in fact, just put a little flow down it, just put it one more flow just to show what your authenticated flow you'd like. Okay. And that could either be, and then the authenticated flow would either be log on or as registered user or, you know, so you'd have two separate flows for that.
Okay. Okay.
You're gonna split these two, Jordan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So log in or register.
Register, and then this is called the authentication flow.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
That is
So
good.
now we have this big flow at the top, which gives us our big picture.
Yeah.
And now we're going to show more detail, and we don't have to go through every step on each of those, but we can show more detail for each of those smaller flows.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's actually some complexity in this authentication flow, given the fact that we also allow two different ways to.
Yeah. So there's Microsoft and
user. Yeah.
the SpecFlow account.
Yeah.
So,
Mm-hmm.
so
But these, I guess these could be split again, right? This authentication flow could be split again into two categories, one for the SpecFlow account, one for the Microsoft account.
Right.
Because you can either register with your Microsoft account or log in with it, or register directly or log in with it, right?
And of course, if you register directly, then in fact, you're going to enter registry information or something.
Mm-hmm.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So
I can't remember. Do you require or should you require a click back to verify the email address?
right, that's only required for direct because in case of Microsoft, we already know that this is a verified email address because users would already have a Microsoft account. So, but for direct sign up, we don't know that, which means in that case, we need to validate the email address and see if it truly works.
Move these flows over here, so it's a bit. Oh shit.
Okay.
That's another subflow actually, validate email address. So, if we,
Yeah.
so where is direct now? Here's direct. Okay. So, and this would be here. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then of course, validating, as you say, that's going to be it can break down into smaller pieces.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's go back to the big one for a moment.
Mhm.
Move over to Okay, so we're editing a file, we authenticate, we save it. We can just set status.
Yeah.
Set sharing status.
Yeah, set sharing status.
Mhm.
Tongue twister.
Yeah. Then we retrieve it, and then another user accesses it. So yep, so we're authenticated. We're at the end of the authentication, then we are authenticated. Given we have a file that we've edited and we authenticated, we can save it. Then having a saved file, we can set the sharing status for it. Then having a shared file, given we have a shared file, we can retrieve the link. The then part is the link, which is now the given for another user being able to retrieve it.
Mhm.
Yep.
Okay,
Is that a good flow, Ken? How did we do?
I like that flow.
And please don't fail me.
But I'd only change the last thing. Another user accesses file using a link and open it. No, and another user accesses link. I mean, shorten that last one.
I would actually change the first one as well. From view to from edit to
Maybe
view.
another user opens the file, right? It's more accurate.
Yeah, yeah.
Another user opens the file.
Because the more words you have in there,
Yeah.
and so now your story, you're just to put this all, scroll up to where you had your stories.
Mhm.
Who's show?
Katerina.
Top.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Keep going.
Yeah.
Keep
going.
Going up.
Oh, okay.
Yep. A little bit more. The very top.
Okay,
Yeah.
Ali,
there you
I'm following you.
go. Oh, you're following me. Excellent.
Okay.
Now you can go where you want, Ali.
There we go.
Okay. So and now, let's see.
You need to zoom in a little, Ali.
Yep.
So that sharing story, that fourth one in,
Hmm.
just copy it for one moment.
This one.
Yeah.
Yep.
And now let's go back to the flow.
Mhm.
And paste it under like set sharing status.
Is that tongue twister?
Yeah. In fact, it actually, and you could almost like, I don't know, you can change the thing so it spreads out over those 3 steps, if you will.
What spreads out over the 3
So
steps?
that story actually is over the 3 steps of the flow: getting, retrieving, and accessing.
We could give
That's
them a
The
separate.
story. The in order to collaborate story.
Okay.
Yeah, can you sort of spread the width of that or not?
Yeah, I can.
Can you? I don't think.
Oh no, I can't.
No, you can't.
No, okay.
I could change the shape, I think.
We can make it really big.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. So that goes over that one.
Mm.
And then just go back to, let's just do one more story.
Yep.
Go back to the top
Mhm.
and you had account creation with the email, copy
Yep.
that story. And put it underneath the, over to the right.
To the right.
Yeah, the direct, you've got,
Oh, that one, yeah.
yeah. Yeah, so that goes over there and that basically, and that's that flow. So now we can see if our stories should, the reason for the flow is to say, here we have a story, here's our flow, where does the story fit into the flow? Oh, right there, okay.
Right, okay.
And now we know that our given for the scenario we create for this story is going to start with whatever we get at that step in the flow and end up with a then at the at the last step of the flow.
Cool.
Okay. All right. Then now, see how we're doing on our, okay, good. We're gonna be. So now, we've got a context, we've got our stories, we've got a context, we've got a flow. And now, and we see where the stories fit into the flow. But we don't have all the details of those stories. And so our first action is going to be called deliberate discovery. In deliberate discovery, we want to figure out what we may not know already about the story, the unknown unknowns. Now, sometimes stories they're pretty straightforward. Sometimes they're not. So it's always good to do this regardless, because it'll just run fast if you know everything already, but you may discover some unknown unknowns. Now, there's a couple of ways you can do this. One popular way is example mapping, that we find some examples and we find some rules and examples of those rules. And another way, for those that might have been using them, are use cases. All those old-fashioned things from, oh man, the last millennium, where you had the preconditions, postconditions, and a main course, and you looked for exceptions, i.e. alternatives that might happen. And some of those alternatives could be an unknown unknown, as you're explaining. What should we do in the case of this exception? What should we do if we're not able to connect with our user registry? So forth. Should we allow them to save a file or not if they can't authenticate? So let's take an example of example mapping. We have rules. And rules are a summary of examples. They sort of express constraints on operations of a flow. And then questions. What is the right outcome? If we come across a scenario for which we're not sure what it should be, well, it's a question. Let's put that up as a separate question. And assumptions that you have made in your flow or in your requirements. Some people have implicit assumptions. It's like, oh man, everybody knows that. Everybody knows that we use kilometers per hour rather than miles per hour. But if you don't show, if you don't specifically put assumptions, other people can't question them and find out that you're making different assumptions. So this is example mapping. We start with a story. We think about a rule or another rule. And how you do this is just basically, and the sequence in which you do this is up to you. Some people have examples, like the example, the one where, or a very specific example, and they take a rule and create examples from it. Some people create examples and then create the rule based on a collection of examples. Whatever your style is. And then we might have another rule, an example of that rule. And as we're coming up with examples and rules, we have questions. I'm not exactly sure what the result should be. And the other key is writing down your assumptions. And we have time tomorrow, we're going to get a little more into assumptions. Key thing, we're assuming that this is the case. So now, the whole purpose of this is figuring out what other scenarios are there. Each one of those examples is going to be most likely a different scenario. We're just trying to discover the alternatives. Now, maybe we're not going to meet all the alternatives. That's okay. Maybe an application can't do everything. But what we want to do is just say, oh, here's an alternative. Let's think about it. Either we implement it or we decide not to do it. So let's, for example, a temperature that's out of range. Here's our scenario. And when I talk about these alternatives, you can come up with example cards, or you can just come up with what I call a title of a scenario. Right? And then we're going to deal with that scenario with it and create a given when-then out of it. So here's the scenario. When I'm converting a report, I have a temperature out of range. I want to make sure the output report indicates an error or something. Maybe I have an input report and it has a temperature that's missing a unit, Fahrenheit or Celsius. So I don't know whether I need to convert that or not. Or maybe the unit's not recognized. They put Q for the unit. Oh, what should the output look like? So what we're doing is discovering alternative scenarios. And this is where you can go wild, but then of course, at a certain point you go, oh, that should never happen. Of course, the thing you say will never happen is the thing that happens, but you want to make sure that your application doesn't have at least bad effects should it occur. Okay. I don't know if you've been reading. I just read about the logging problem with Java. It is now hitting a few websites out there, and it's like whatever they were doing, trying to execute code or something. Maybe we shouldn't have done this. So now, what we're going to be doing is coming up with an example of a scenario, or coming up with just an alternative. So whether you use the example mapping or whether you simply go, okay, so here are just the names of some of these alternatives. Okay. So SpecFlow, pick your story. There we go. And come up with some examples.
All right.
Yeah, so we're going to build on the same story that we used in the previous two exercises, the sharing a feature file.
Yeah.
Yep.
In
I'm
order to
already
collaborate.
going ahead and putting some questions down, Ali.
Okay. So that's our story. Next, we have to come up with our rule, right, Ken?
Yep.
Clarifying questions. What if?
Okay, so what about what if the user is not logged in?
Okay.
Yeah.
Shared file deleted.
It's a good one, Jordan, huh?
Yes.
Let's see if we can find a way to break our live production application. Let's not do that. Oh yeah.
Oh, okay, Ali. It's a tricky one.
Yeah, it's not a live collaboration, so.
That's hidden for me. One of them's hidden.
What's hidden?
I've got an icon with your face and it's a little lock.
Really?
I mean, the icon's beautiful, but it'd be better to
Thank
see
you.
the
Thank you,
content. Yeah,
I don't know. I haven't locked anything.
weird. I mean,
All right. So what have we got? Shared file is deleted. The user is not logged in. What if someone else is editing at the same time? The previously shared file is shared again. I don't think that would cause any problems. The URL would change, huh? What if someone changes the share options and someone is saying that? Okay. Ooh.
yeah, so if two people are trying to share the same file with different sharing options at the same time.
They would just get two different links.
Yeah, we don't know that yet, though, do we?
Well, I'm giving you the answers, mate. You can't just ask, you can't just ask questions.
Can the link expire?
Once it's deleted, the
Yeah, I guess.
feature
No,
file,
in general, is it always there? I put the question down.
yeah.
So
Yeah, but hypothetically, we haven't built it yet, have we? So.
Yeah, that's true.
But you're learning more about your application just by asking these questions.
It's flawless, mate. Don't worry. I should say that true.
yeah. So
Can you zoom up your screen just a little bit so people can? That's better.
and exist again. Okay. Can you guys think about something else still?
No, not at the moment. I think
All right.
we have a fair few here. To
You
give
want
the
to-
answers to.
Yeah, you want to just read those off so that
Yeah.
people.
All right. Then let's as we go through answering them, because we need to answer in order to come up with an example for it. What the behavior is. So what if a shared file is deleted? So the answer would be shared link no longer finds a file.
Yeah.
Share.
This one is they can't share it, right?
Yeah, it's one. Good work, Jared. It's the hard one. What is
Winner, mate.
Which user is not logged in? The user accessing the file or the user
Oh, that's a
sharing
good
it?
question.
Ooh, the
So there's another one here, right?
yeah.
The user is not the
Let's call it, say the sharing user.
sharing user, yeah.
Oh.
The receiving user is not logged in. They can view it.
Someone said would it be the last edit?
Save without sign in. Okay.
The one where someone's
Yeah.
so they
But
would just
you would overwrite each other, right? If you're so the person that hit save the last, that change remains.
It would
right?
overwrite the file.
but this is ambiguous because it says what if someone else is editing a feature? Does it mean editing the share permissions or editing the context of the feature file itself?
I think we mean the way I understood it is that we're changing the feature file, so we're changing the file.
Yeah, the
itself.
content.
Yeah.
Editing the content of a feature once it is shared by the user. then they would just see the latest content, right?
Yeah, they would see the latest save by whoever.
Yeah. Yeah.
By the winner.
Yeah, by the winner. Mhm. Previously shared file is shared again.
Generates a new URL.
The file is accessible under the same original sharing URL.
Can a file that's been shared with somebody be reshared by somebody else?
Yeah.
Would it just generate the same link?
What if someone changes the share options as someone is setting them? That's not possible because the file can only have one owner.
But if I shared it, so say for example, if I created a file, shared it with you and Ali, and then you and Ali both simultaneously went in to change the share permissions, one of you set them to public, the other one set it to read only. What then? Is it just the last set wins, right? Whoever changes it last
Yeah.
wins.
The last one would win, I think.
Yeah.
Yep.
But you can't edit the sharing permissions.
Can't you?
Well, if you give them the right to do it.
If you give them edit access, surely.
Well, hold on a second. So I've got to understand this. So I've created a file. I share the file, but okay, only the owner can change the permissions. That makes sense. Okay.
Is that right?
That is right, Jordan.
Hold it. Let's not ask what's right. Let's ask what it should be.
Yeah, that's how it should be. That's how it should be, and that's how it behaves.
Thank God.
Okay.
I guess can the link expire? The link won't expire, but the content will, right? Right.
We also have one from in the chat. Can you share it to multiple users at the same time? Yeah, you can.
Yeah, you
Just
can.
give the link away. Yeah.
Same link. Yeah.
We can pick this up. Is shared with more than one user? The answer is the link can be circulated as much as wanted.
The last one then, shared file is converted to unshared. So I share the link with you, Matthias, and then I change the permissions to private or whatever. Then I guess if you were to try and access the link, you wouldn't be able to see the content, right?
Exactly.
It would disappear.
If I have it open after my browser refresh, I would not see it anymore. Okay, cool. These are the answers. So then now we can start putting headlines down for proper examples for these, right? So how would we put this in one statement?
We'll just do this for a couple of those.
Yeah.
I hate naming. I hate naming scenarios. It's always the hardest part, isn't it? Maybe the chat can help us.
Logged in users can share files.
Deleted files not accessible. Yeah, fair shout.
This scenario would be non-file owners can always view shared files. Right? Do you like that?
Can't see how we can make them shorter.
No, that's good. That's a good title, right? It's
Yeah.
good.
Now, yeah, you're coming up now with the titles for those scenarios. Oh, deleting, scenario deleting the shared files. That's
We have
somebody
that somewhere.
suggested. Yeah, you've already got that at the top.
Delete file. Oh, the first one.
Deleted files are inaccessible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
So this is the interesting part of the collaboration, is to actually see if you can come up with a title that everybody agrees with.
Yeah. That's why I asked you guys. So
Proving to be the hardest part.
I'll pick another one and can try to come up with something. So,
Easy one. Huh? What if someone changes it?
sharing the file is accessible under the same. File URLs always stay the same. You guys like that?
File URLs always stay the same. Previously shared file shared again. Yeah, okay.
Oh, resharing this in the somebody suggested resharing the shared file.
Resharing the shared file.
But the consequence, the behavior is really that the URL doesn't change. It's the only significant difference of resharing.
That's a good point.
Very good point. The chat
That is
said, and sticky notes suggest that you need to come up with short names.
That's very true. Yeah, that's a
Thank you.
really good point.
Yeah, we are spoiled with this stuff.
Well, unless you make them larger, obviously, like this. But real sticky notes.
Yeah, yeah. See, when I use real, I've done this obviously on real paper, and somebody says, "Yeah, I'll be able to fit it. I'm just going to use like a pencil and with little small font." I go, "No, no, no. You need to use a Sharpie, a big fat Sharpie, and still make it readable."
So I think this is how I would. Do you guys agree with my scenario here? So for the saving conflict resolution, I wrote down every save writes to the file because that's the essence of it. Right?
We
So
save
if I'm the last save, I would just overwrite whatever is there. So every save writes to the file.
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Do you want us to finish this up? Did we last
I think we said that we would end up at after 2 hours and then have like time for questions.
Sure. So then we will just pause it here, you know, and we will do the rest until we continue tomorrow, the remaining 4.
Yep.
I'll just flag those right now.
Well,
yeah.
There's currently only one question in the Q&A, unless people want to ask more now. But...
Oh, okay. So why don't you finish it up? Yeah, see what.
Yeah, maybe we finish it up and then
finish it up.
The audience, you guys can put in questions in the Q&A while we're doing it.
All right. So while you guys are doing that, is there a rule best practice for example mapping title? That's a good question. Okay. What we want is for that scenario name to designate the purpose or what is happening in the scenario. And it could be that we actually need to sort of create the scenario and then realize what the scenario is, because the scenario itself is going to give us the behavior. And what we want is a succinct title for that behavior or the succinct rule. So the scenario, and once again, it is all dependent. And I always say it's the triad that makes the decisions, because then there's some triads that are a little more technical and some that are less technical. So if we had a scenario, and this is our sort of our that a file URL always stays the same. Well, is that a rule for which we need an example, and the example, or is that really the title of a scenario? Well, we've got one rule, and we're only going to have one example of that rule, so why not make that the title of the scenario? So a scenario URL always stays the same. Okay, we'll answer that next question. So scenario file URL always stays the same. Given I have a file, a shared file with this link, when I share it, when I unshare it, and then reshare it, that URL still leads to the same file. That's basically what's going to be inside that scenario. So, sounds like a good title to me. So, does that title describe accurately what is the behavior in that scenario? All right.
There's another question.
Yep. Are there expectations of the behavior of the team members to make exploration collaboration successful? Oh, so we did behavior-driven development. Now we need to have team member behavior. All right. Well, I always say that the one expectation is that everybody is involved, that you're not bringing up your mural board and somebody's playing Angry Birds on their phone. Okay. So that I consider it's basically the rule for collaboration. That let me see, you've got, oh, yes. And that's the second rule. That's the second rule. Is you check back, and that's just a part of collaboration, is everybody agrees. So, and I'm going to say the other rule of behavior is we're not after absolute perfection. We will never achieve that because you can always start to rewrite these scenarios and a title and anything else in the scenario in multiple ways. So I'm going to call it that we have a collaborative effort on the team members that they go, yep, that's good enough. Well, we understand the scenario, yeah, and we're not going to spend, days, hours, or even long minutes just rewriting that single thing. Do we understand what we're talking about? Do we expect we would understand it in a couple of weeks? And would somebody else looking at it and looking at the detail too, because we're not trying to explain the entire scenario just in a title, would they be able to understand it as well? So the expectations on the behavior, involved and collaborative in the sense that, yep, you appreciate what everybody else is doing and you accept the shared result. Okay. Yes. So somebody had asked this before. Can automation engineers write the code for the BDD steps, or does it only have to be developers? All right. So there are at least two ways. So let me answer this question. There are at least two ways that you can automate things. And I'm gonna say there's a difference between the business rule or calculation scenarios and the flow scenarios. Okay. a business rule and a calculation, as we'll see, normally goes against a single method or couple of methods in the code itself. That temperature conversion, we're going to have a method inside that provides that externally visible behavior. No reason to have an automation engineer do that, because in fact, as we'll see in Jordan tomorrow, we'll show this, is that we're calling a method. The developer has decided what that method name is. So it's the glue code knows, it needs to know that method. And an automation engineer just creating this thing would go, I don't know what it's going to call. But let's take the other half. If you're doing flow scenarios, particularly ones that go against the UI, then an automation engineer could write the code that binds it to the UI. All right, and that typically is what an automation engineer would do. But once again, I want to try and bind that to as small as possible a piece of the UI is available. Okay, so that the smaller of a piece of the flow, the less likely it's to break given any other problem, any other issues. Okay. And so I think what would each of the what ifs be a scenario in a SpecFlow feature file, or is it better to group multiple what ifs into a single scenario considering the performance over? So all of those things that we questioned, the questions that we had, it really, if you could group what ifs into a single scenario, if that were possible, well, let me take a step back here. If we have a single scenario, we're not worried about performance for the moment. Okay, I always put performance as one of the later issues. The question is whether we group scenarios together into a single scenario. These what ifs tend to be a bit separate. Each one identifies a different facet of things. But if we had a scenario where we had, users with 5 or 6 different levels of permission, and it might be that we could put those all into some sort of a scenario outline, and so that we're grouping them not for having things in 5 different scenarios and you're trying to see whether they all match up to the same thing, but by using a scenario outline, you go, okay, here's the flow, and I can see I'm doing it with 5 different user types or something like that. So once again, context, I think on these contexts that to try and group those together is those individual things. I'm not seeing, and I haven't looked at all of the details here, whether they really could be grouped together without forcing things. But on the other hand, to group like scenarios and create a scenario outline that just shows different actions, that I would group together. And once again, I would not be concerned with performance on any of this. As we'll see, the only time I'm going to call performance is that it turns out if you actually use that second version of what I call the business rule scenario, instead of having a given when then, you just use a star and do your looping. That actually does have better performance and perhaps even better readability. Okay. Does BDD require a certain way of coding for it to be able to be tested in this way. For the business rules, i.e. here we have some input and we create a single output, I'm going to say that that suggests a way of coding. That is that somewhere there's going to be a function in production that says convert temperature, going to expect a Celsius, going to return a Fahrenheit. I mean, that's what the behavior is we want. So I'm going to have a function like that. It doesn't demand the name of that function be called anything. And it doesn't say that function can't be broken into 6 or 8 different sub functions or sub methods that all provide a portion of the behavior, i.e. check for limits, do the rounding and so forth. So it doesn't demand, but it suggests. But let me take one other issue, point on this. If I've created, or the triad has created, the scenario ahead of time, and in fact, on that scenario, we've got these little individual names for all of the columns, Celsius and Fahrenheit and so forth and so on, that what will happen then is when we convert that into the code, we're going to have those names in the test, Celsius and Fahrenheit, all spelled out, which is going to suggest, and that's before we've written the actual conversion, which is going to suggest that maybe that parameter name to that method should be called Celsius. Oh, which means that we have a flow from our business domain terminology into the code itself. They don't, in the old days, coders would go, oh, Celsius, I'll just call that CEL or CLS something. All right, because you didn't want to type too many characters in there. Today, we've got the names coming from the external scenarios. We can use those in our internal implementation. And what that does is it now ties, for a good purpose, couples the terminology in the external world to the terminology in the internal world. Doesn't happen for everything, but it's much nicer. You go, oh, okay, I see this in the test. I see this in the code. All right. One complaint about Gherkin is we need to use as given the same setup we do for other test variations for the same functionality. Okay, for example, given I am logged into this website. Okay. All right, now we come to the I'm going to call it the big question. I think I've seen other people give examples of this. In fact, I'm going to call it the major thing that I see is this: are you logged into the website or not? So you always have this, given I am logged into the website, and I always have to have that in each one of the givens. In this particular specific case, what you can do, there's multiple ways to do this. First, you could separate your files, have a background saying, given I'm logged in, and in the background, and that would then apply to everything else. And then the other would, given I'm not logged in, that could be the background for everything else. So you could separate your feature files and here's the stuff for logged in, and here's the stuff for not logged in people. And they just use the background. Some people use tags on a scenario that then indicates, yep, this is a tag that's saying I am logged in. So that's setup. Okay, especially for just setting up things, such as being logged in, can be done alternative ways, so you don't have the repetition that you normally see. Given I'm logged in, I've seen lots of scenarios like that. The other issue is, so we can use the background, and some people have we'll call it issues with the background. But if I've got this set of functionality that requires some of this, the exact same setup, that I need to have certain things occur, this has to be done, I can organize my features files with the background up there and the scenarios within it, and then have another feature file with backgrounds in the scenarios within it. That's just one way of doing the separation. Some people try, in fact, hide that. My key thing is another sort of differentiation here, or do you want to be explicit or implicit? If you've got a setup that needs to be done, do you want to be explicit in the gherkin that this needs to be done, or can you implicit and hide that within the step definitions themselves? I tend to suggest explicitness beats implicitness, if you will. Okay, is BDD only for simple scenarios, or can we test multiple cases with one BD scenario? Oh, that has two aspects to it. Simple scenarios and testing multiple test cases, which simply means, is it just a simple scenario that has multiple variations? So let's start with the simple part. Simple. In fact, if BDD has such a simple scenario to it, chances are you're not learning much from it. Okay, given I have 2 and I add 2, then I get 4. Pretty simple scenario. And maybe you might try and find some additional things from that. But a little more, if we've got scenarios where we've got multiple inputs that are going to all be needed to create an output or set of outputs, well, that goes from a simple scenario to a complex one. And in fact, when you get to where I need 3 inputs to create 4 different outputs, that's a scenario where we need to understand all the ramifications of the inputs to the outputs. Now, can you combine multiple test cases? Well, if, as I mentioned before, the scenario outline, if you can put things into the same case, you can use a scenario outline to give 4, 5, or 10 different test cases against that one particular flow, if you will. But I also look at sometimes when you're doing that, you probably, if you need to use a scenario outline against a large flow through the UI or through multiple steps, did you miss a business rule that could have been tested all by itself with lots of different variations? We don't need to test lots of business rules in the UI. We just need to test that the UI is connected to the business rules, which then eliminates to have lots of test cases at the UI level. I mean, I'll just give an example. Okay, ordering. If you're creating an ordering form, and you have one thing in the order and 10 things, and some have discounts, some have not, and so forth and so on. That's all just one huge calculation business rule. You shouldn't be testing that through the UI. All of those combinations, taxes, calculation, shipping, and everything should be automated as business rules. And then all in the UI we are testing is, let me put an order in for one item. Let's see what the calculation is. Did it get shipped? Let me put an order in for whatever maximum number of items just to make sure the UI is working. And let me see if that got shipped. And maybe a couple of other examples. So we don't want to, the more that you try and test everything at the flow, at the various top, the slower it's going to be, the more brittle it's going to be. All of those combinations. Computing taxes, computing discounts, computing everything should be done with more simple scenarios that are directed to each of those individual things. Okay. Let's see. Okay, we're coming to the time limit in the last one. Is there a limit to the number of scenarios in a feature file and the number of steps in a scenario? All right, let's put it this way. In my experience, I have never found that, but we now have the SpecFlow people. Do we have an answer? Do you have any limitation on the number of steps or the number of scenarios in
No.
your code?
Don't think so.
No,
But
there's no.
were they talking technically or in practice, if that makes sense?
Well,
Yeah.
let's first ask the technical question.
Yeah, no, I don't think there's a limit.
No, I don't think so. You
No.
just get a bigger and bigger piece of code.
Mhm.
Okay, and obviously that. So there is no limit, but the thing is, there is a user limit. You don't want a feature file that has 100 scenarios in it, because it's going to be hard to find the scenarios. It's going to be hard to read. So we want feature files that are more directed, if you will. That doesn't mean you can't have 100, but it all needs to be very directed towards something. And that's probably got to be a very complex thing. The number of steps in a scenario, no, but chances are you want to keep it small. Just a few things coming in, just a few things going out. And of course, you can use, by the way, tables in each of the scenario steps if you need multiple inputs. So you can have just one given and give it a table with 4, 5, 6 different values, a when, and then the then can have 4 or 5, 6 values. So you don't need to have multiple givens and wins, if you will. Recommendation is, chances 1 win, maybe a win and an and. Many givens as you need, but once you get past 2 or 3, it's like what you're doing is having a really big scenario, which is more like an end-to-end flow sort of scenario. And then the thens, whatever you need, but chances are 2 or 3. So that's from just a practical point of what a scenario should encompass, if you will. And most people agree you shouldn't start with a given, when, then. You can break those up, unless you were really just trying to do one flow through scenario that was just an end-to-end thing. But once you get an end-to-end scenario that has that many things in it, you truly are going to have issues with this thing working all the time, because each of the individual steps might start to have a change in it. Okay.
Just one last point. If for the number of scenarios, based on the research we did and data we collected, what we hard coded into the editor is more than 5 in one feature file. But it's just a suggestion, obviously. There is no limitations, but your feature file will look a lot better if you keep it under 5.
Is that a rule in the editor? In the Gherkin
That's
editor?
the rule in the editor, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But not in the IDE though, right?
No. The IDE has no limitations. You can put 1,000 in there. Yeah.
Well, I thought that was scenarios within a rule as opposed to scenarios within the entire file in the editor, but you know it better than I do.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
So there's no open questions, as I see. I'm going to share my screen. Do you want to show the example headline? Or should we Sorry.
And you can double click on this, Katarina.
Okay.
There you go. I did this in the meantime.
Oh, nice.
So this is our starting point for tomorrow. These are the headlines for our scenarios.
Mhm.
Cool.
Okay, excellent. So we reached the end of the day. We'll see you at whatever the time is, 1/2 an hour, according to your appropriate time zone. I can't use one. And
And just before we end, can I add something? I would like to draw your attention to the fact that Ken provides his own trainings to the teams, and only for SpecFlow users Ken offers 2 options: 2-day team training and thread coaching. The first one is for the entire team: Scrum Master, Product Owner, Business Analyst, Testers, Developers. And the second one is only up to 4 hours, and actually it is more suitable for teams that are familiar with BDD but run into some difficulties applying it to particular user stories. So can help with advice and help you to break it down in BDD style. So we'll share the link. Jordan, can you share it to the Ken's page? You can book the training, also find all the needed information, including duration, price, outcome, everything. And both trainings can provide remotely, so online. And thank you for joining this session. See you all tomorrow. And also please follow us on social media, in Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, comment our posts, share them, and have a nice day. Thank you. And see you tomorrow.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.